Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, it's to take this stack of pretty dense source material, we're talking government policy papers, investment reports, infrastructure forecasts, and really distill the strategic intelligence that you need. We are going deep into Canada's, let's call it highly aggressive, government-backed commitment to building its domestic AI ecosystem. And look, this isn't just about small grants or, typical R&D funding. Our sources are showing a national strategy that's really shifting gear almost onto an infrastructure war footing, specifically around compute capacity, cooling, and the policy to back it all up. Now, for you, this deep dive is crucial. The funding, the policy signals we're seeing, they hit right at the intersection of your core focus, things like Arctic data centers, renewable energy solutions, and that heavy computing infrastructure. So we're going to try and piece together the four big ingredients here: talent, infrastructure, capital, and regulatory support, and show how government action seems to be jump-starting all four at once.
Yeah, what's fascinating here really is the sheer scale, but also the strategic intent behind this policy intervention. I mean, we aren't just talking about private venture capital driving the story here. This is the federal government explicitly saying it will invest billions, that's the word they're using, to support Canadian-made AI. And crucially, this scale-up is tied very directly to building domestic compute capacity, which, let's be honest, is a resource bottleneck that pretty much every major economy is scrambling over right now.
Right. And what surprised me looking through these documents wasn't just that billions headline figure, but the specificity of some allocations already happening, like back in September 2025.
Yeah.
It shows this isn't just talk. The commitment's active, money's flowing.
That specificity is absolutely key. We have actual tangible proof points. For instance, nearly $19.7 million was injected pretty much immediately for compute support. And that means you're buying this specialized hardware, the GPUs, and ensuring access for domestic researchers and startups. But the government's vision, it goes beyond just buying kit. They also committed over $9 million specifically for training energy sector workers in AI. This is being channeled through, well, a pretty high-profile initiative, the AI Pathways AMII AI project. AMII, for anyone not familiar, is the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute. They're a global leader in AI research. So dedicating funds to retrain energy workers through AMII, it suggests the government is deliberately trying to solve a future problem.
What problem is that?
Well, who's going to run these power-hungry data centers? And who manages the complex energy grids needed to actually power them reliably? They're thinking about the operational side.
That training piece really does signal some serious long-term planning. But okay, this brings us back to that strategic question you touched on. Why? Why is the government stepping in so heavily? Why not just let the private market sort AI growth out?
Well, if we connect this to let's say, the bigger geopolitical picture, the answer seems to be about mitigating national strategic risk. I think the government recognizes that if Canada relies only on, say, foreign hyperscalers, the big U.S. cloud providers, for their sensitive data and AI training, then they risk losing control. They risk intellectual property leakage, maybe migrating south, and they definitely sacrifice a degree of data sovereignty.
Okay. So the policy signal is pretty clear then. Canada is making an explicit choice not to leave foundational AI development and the infrastructure it needs solely to the private markets, especially foreign ones. This investment is kind of an active measure to keep control over their own innovation, their own IP.
Exactly. They're positioning themselves not just as, facilitators handing out grants, but as actual co-builders of the infrastructure needed to secure a global competitive advantage. It's a deliberate national strategy. The goal is to ensure Canadian companies can train their models on Canadian data using Canadian compute resources, which, importantly, gives them critical regulatory resilience down the line.
Okay, but let's push on that point for a second. The sources are generally positive about this investment, right? But I mean, is Satide $19.7 million really enough to genuinely compete with US or, APAC hyperscalers? Those guys spend that kind of money, like before breakfast? Is there a risk noted anywhere that Canada might end up relying too heavily on nurturing domestic vendors who maybe can't scale fast enough?
That's a really important challenge. And yeah, the sources do acknowledge it. Look, CA $19.7 million is objectively a drop in the ocean compared to the global giants, no question. However, the thinking seems to be that this investment is catalytic. Its function isn't really to match the U.S. dollar for dollar, but more to stimulate domestic demand, build confidence, and, importantly, validate the market for subsequent private investment. It signals stability and long-term government commitment. And by targeting specific compute bottlenecks, they're aiming to reduce those massive upfront capital costs for domestic startups. That drastically improves their chances, their viability.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's more like a strategic leverage point, not trying to win a spending war they
Yeah.
can't win. Right. Now, whenever we talk about scaling AI, the conversation pivots really quickly, doesn't it? From the fancy algorithms and models to just heavy, physical stuff,
Yeah.
infrastructure. And the sources really hammer this point home. Scaling AI demands heavy compute, yes, but also massive data centers, stable energy, and maybe most critically for efficiency, effective cooling.
And this brings us right back to your specific area of focus. This is where Canada's geography potentially becomes a major national strategic asset. The government's intense focus on AI compute ties directly into the efficiency gains you get from cold climate cooling, and also the potential for deploying reliable edge compute capabilities across those vast Canadian distances.
Can you elaborate a bit on that efficiency gain, the PUE point?
Sure. So we're talking basic physics, really, but tied directly to economics. Data center efficiency is often measured by something called power usage effectiveness, or PUE. A perfect score is 1.0. That means all the energy goes purely into computation. None is wasted on overhead like cooling. Now, using cold ambient air, like you can in many parts of Canada for much of the year, drastically cuts the energy needed for cooling systems. This pushes PUE scores down closer to that ideal 1.0, and that cuts operational expenditure, the ongoing running costs, or OPEX, significantly.
Okay, so the cold climate isn't just some quirky feature, it's potentially an economic multiplier. It's directly linked to the success of this whole national AI investment strategy. Every dollar they don't have to spend on chilling servers is a dollar they can spend on faster GPUs or, hiring more talent.
Precisely. And furthermore, this infrastructure focus brings up the whole issue of supply chain resilience. Building these advanced data centers, especially if you're considering northern or more remote areas, need specialized components. The sources kind of hint that this big push from the government might actually start to fundamentally alter some supply chains for cold weather data center tech, maybe even stimulating local manufacturing or assembly for certain parts eventually.
Wow. Okay, that's a phenomenal strategic implication to consider. It's not just about using the cold, but maybe building a core national competence around deploying infrastructure in the cold. We should also touch on edge compute. What's the significance there in this Canadian context?
Yeah, good point. Given Canada's geography, vast distances, lots of remote industry, edge compute isn't really optional, it's essential. Think about sectors like mining, energy infrastructure management, remote environmental monitoring. Edge compute means doing the processing locally, close to where the data is actually generated, rather than shipping everything back to a huge central facility, perhaps thousands of kilometers away. So the government investment implicitly validates this need for distributed, high-capacity computing nodes, not just relying on a few hyperscale facilities clustered in the major southern cities. And this ties back to that energy sector training funding we talked about earlier too, right? You'll need skilled people who can actually maintain these secure, high-uptime facilities, often in pretty challenging remote environments.
Okay, so if the foundation is this compute infrastructure powered efficiently by the cold climate, what kind of house is Canada trying to build on top of it? What kind of AI? The sources seem to point clearly towards the enterprise market.
That's right. The sources definitely note that many of the leading Canadian AI firms, and they specifically call out companies like Cohere, which is obviously a major global player now in foundational models and generative AI, are primarily enterprise-oriented. They're focused on building tools for businesses rather than, say, purely consumer-facing apps.
And this enterprise focus, well, that's highly relevant for your consulting practice, isn't it? It signals a market opportunity that's probably centered on regulated, high-value industries like finance, healthcare, maybe resources and energy.
Absolutely. Think about the strategic advice you're giving to clients. If you're advising, say, a major Canadian bank or a large industrial company on their AI strategy and tech adoption or roadmap, the landscape has genuinely shifted. Instead of just automatically defaulting to the big U.S. incumbents, this strong government support, combined with that focus on data sovereignty we discussed, means that local Canadian AI vendors suddenly look like much more viable, potentially powerful, and crucially, regulatory compliant partners.
Why more compliant?
Well, Canadian firms are often inherently better positioned to handle the specific Canadian regulatory compliance needs, things like PIPEDA for data privacy, or rules around handling sensitive operational technology data in the energy sector. Using them can provide a genuine alternative to U.S.-based services, which might sometimes raise concerns about cross-border data flows and jurisdiction.
Right. So for one of your clients, maybe looking at their vendor selection matrix, this public investment provides that crucial capital backing. It sort of validates the long-term viability and stability of potential domestic partners. It helps de-risk sourcing locally.
It absolutely does. And, from a consulting opportunity perspective, this creates obvious strategic mandates, right? If you're advising a U.S. company looking to operate or partner in Canada, how does this public investment change the due diligence they need to do on local players? Conversely, if you're advising domestic Canadian clients, you probably need to map out which specific government funding programs or grants they should be targeting to maybe offset their AI adoption costs. This is strategic intelligence in action, really.
Yeah, exactly. And as the source material itself highlights, this also creates a wealth of communication and marketing opportunities. The strategic narrative piece, like that suggested angle, Polarify Consulting, building a story that can capitalize on this whole national initiative.
Precisely. You can craft really compelling narratives around why Canada now. You can link the Arctic compute advantage, the secured AI capital flows that are coming in, and highlight specific enterprise-focused Canadian startups to watch. This government investment basically validates that entire narrative arc, the story of a potentially self-sustaining northern-powered AI industry taking shape.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. Let's just quickly recap the three core pillars we've pulled out from all these sources today, just for your strategic review. First, those billions in government capital are already being allocated. This moves AI development beyond just being a private market thing. It's now framed as a matter of national strategic importance, partly to protect data sovereignty. Second, there's that laser focus on compute and infrastructure. It directly links the national AI growth strategy to data centers, PUE efficiency, and those cold climate advantages we discussed. It's becoming a key differentiator. And third, we're seeing the definite maturation of an enterprise-focused AI vendor market in Canada. It's being validated by this capital injection, providing potentially powerful, regulatory-savvy local alternatives for strategic partnerships.
Yeah, and I'd add that this government commitment, it provides a really powerful tailwind for anyone operating in this space. And consider the longer-term implications of that specific investment in training energy sector workers. That skilled workforce will be absolutely essential for managing the complex regulatory and operational challenges of meeting this heavy compute demand, especially if we see more data centers built in remote or northern locations. It signals Canada is genuinely thinking decades ahead on the operational side.
That future talent pipeline is.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to take away and consider. Given Canada's explicit policy position here, trying to build competitive advantage via compute and infrastructure, and really validating cold weather deployment, how might this massive public investment start to fundamentally alter global supply chains? Specifically for specialized AI data center components and maybe cold weather technologies, say, over the next 5 years. Could Canada actually become a significant exporter of cold climate infrastructure expertise and related technology, not just the AI models themselves? That's a huge question, I think, for future strategy. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We look forward to seeing the strategy you build from this.